Hey guys, Miles Away here. Hope everybody's doing really well. I know these are crazy times, so I'm wishing everything all the best for you guys, your families, anybody you know. The one plus side though of being home is I've had a lot of time to practice my synths, to practice sound design, and I've really gotten to know my newest synth, Novation Summit. So I wanted to bring you guys a review. I hope you guys enjoyed this review. Let me know if you have any questions about the synth in the comments, any recommendations. I always love talking nerdy synth talk. So final thing, my new song is out now on Trap Nation. It's called Horrors. Please check that out. Remember to like and subscribe. It really helps the channel grow. Otherwise, enjoy the video. Alright, so to start off with here, we're going to initialize the preset. So that sounds like this, just going to be a basic saw wave. So what's really cool about the Summit is it actually has digital oscillators, but they're very high quality. But then it's going to be going through a hybrid digital analog signal path. So while the oscillators are digital, the filter is full analog, as well as the overdrive and the distortion. So basically what that means is that you're going to get the flexibility of digital, which is just always really precise, allows you to do a lot of really crazy things with wavetables, but then you're going to get that paired with the warmth, the grit, the overall sound of analog, the something that is the reason why people, including me, are so obsessed with these instruments. So right over here, we're going to start with the oscillator section. So we've got our saw wave, square wave, sine, triangle, and each one of these actually has wave shaping right on the front panel, which, as I mentioned in my prologue video, is something I really value here. Got our pulse width modulation, of course. So what I think is so great about this is you can right there, without even going into the wavetable section, you've got everything you need for a really great subtractive analog polysynth that's warm, it's versatile, there's tons of modulation, and even if that was the whole synth right there, you could be happy with that, and you'd be like, you know what, that's a great synth. But then you go to this more section here, and you've got what are essentially 43 wavetables. So if any of you have ever used software synths like Serum, you'll know wavetables very well. So what that allows is it opens up a whole new dimension of synthesis. So we've got essentially, for a good analogy is for some of my producer friends I've talked to about, it's like Serum being ran through high quality analog gear. So the sound quality is just, in my humble opinion, like an arm and a leg better than any other wavetable synth I've ever heard, because you're running these wavetables, which traditionally can be considered quite thin and, lacking some sound sometimes. You're running them through really great analog gear. Okay, so moving on from the oscillators here, we also have a modulation section for each oscillator. So what that allows us to do is, without any menu diving, do quick things like pitch or LFO to pitch, or the shape. We can modulate that right away with an LFO. And it really is knob per function, in the sense that you can just work so fast on this synth because of how many things are right there on the front panel without any menu diving. So moving on, we then have one of my favorite sections of the whole synth, which is something I really wish more synths had. And to be honest, it was one of the main reasons why I bought this. That's FM synthesis right on the front panel. We've got frequency modulation from oscillator 3 to 1, 1 to 2, and 2 to 3. So you can make it as subtle or as crazy as you want. Let's try something here. to bring them all to sine waves to get that FM character. Right away, that sounds like FM. And then same as with the pitch and the shape, you can have these quick modulation destinations. So we'll do a quick FM bass. Go to the envelope here. Right there, like 5 seconds into sound design, we already have a pretty famous FM pluck bass sound. This is kind of going to be the theme of this review here, is that this synth, the workflow is just so fast compared to anything else I've used. Okay, moving on here. So we've got our oscillator section, we've got our modulation section here, or at least front panel modulation section, and FM. So overall, after that, we've got our mixer, which again, some really great knob per function modulation. We can go right away into filter, modulate that, and then we've got some pretty crazy, interesting modulation things like filter mod, which is going to modulate oscillator 3 by the filter, and then another really great feature of this, which is ring modulation built in to the front panel. So what that's going to sound like, we're going to turn off the oscillator. What that does is, without having to do any sort of complex algorithms or complex routing, you've got basically a built-in ring modulator, which as you affect the pitch of oscillator 2, okay, moving on here, we've got our filter, which is one of the stars of the show for me. This is just an amazing sounding filter. It's full analog. There are 4 modes. So we've got our low pass, really brassy, but not too abrasive. So then you've got your resonance added in at half. Listen to that analog filter. That is just pure analog goodness right there. And then full resonance. Careful, you might want to turn down your headphones here. Amazing. Cool. And then going on to the other modes, we've got a band pass, and then we've got a high pass. If there's one thing that I did have as a con, not a con, but a limitation, is that there is only one filter, and as we can see in a minute, it can be split into 2. It would be really nice to have, even if it was just a separate small dial right here, a separate high pass, because while I'm producing, I really like to roll off the lows of my chords, my plucks, my pads, and with the Summit, I do have to do that in Logic after. It's not the end of the world, but it's a small workflow limitation that I think would really, go a long way. So going on to the final mode of the filter here, we've got a dual filter mode, which is really cool. That sounds like this. Moving on, we've got our envelopes. Really interesting that they decided to go with sliders over knobs here. I think that's awesome. I've always loved using sliders for envelopes. Harkens back to like the Juno and Jupiter style of synths from Roland, but got a really nice long release there. Can go on for practically forever, or you can make them as snappy as you like. So we've got our amplitude envelope here, and then 2 mod envelopes, which as we can see earlier, you can route them wherever you like. Really, there's just a lot of modulation capability, and it all feels very well implemented here and right on the surface. So it's a great synth for experimenting with sound design like that. Okay, moving on here, we've got our LFO section, which we kind of already went through, so I'll go over it quickly. But there's 2 dedicated LFOs, which can really be routed to any parameter. There's a full modulation menu system over here where you can route up to 16 destinations, whatever you want, to these 2 LFOs. So they're also per voice, which is really great because what that means is it allows for some really interesting sounds like this. What we're basically doing is we're causing one of the LFOs to modulate the rate of the other, which is creating a cascading symphony of sounds that each note, every time it's pressed, is moving and modulating at a different speed. So that's great. I've always loved LFOs per voice. It just makes it a lot more human and adds a lot more movement. But if you don't want LFOs per voice, like if you just want to do a basic, kind of overall global pitch modulation, or if you want to modulate the effects, yes, you can do that in the synth. That's awesome. Then they also have 2 extra LFOs, which are a lot simpler. They're great for modulating the reverb or modulating the pitch as a global setting. That brings us to finally the effects section, which I think is one of the stars of this synth. So the effects right off the bat, the reverb. One of the nicest, I'm going to say it's the nicest reverb I've heard on an analog synth. I mean, I know I said that before with the prologue, but this one, if I had to pick, if you held me up against a wall, I'd pick the Summit reverb. It's so lush. Just beautiful for these drones. That also brings us to the chorus, which is equally as amazing. So lush. You've got an amazing pad right there. Beautiful. This right here could just be a sound that I would use in a Miles Away song, and I made it in five seconds, right? Then moving on, we have a delay, which the delay it's fairly basic. I would say the delay sounds a little bit more on the digital side than I would like, coming from something like my Moog Matriarch over there, where the delay is just absolutely phenomenal, and it's full stereo analog BBD. The delay here, it gets the job done, but I wouldn't say it's one of the highlights of the synth. And then finally, really amazing 2 analog distortions. There's actually a third one hidden as pre-filtered too, but the ones that are on the front panel are the ones I find myself using just because there's no menu diving involved, and they're just really awesome. Let's take a sine wave here. So that would be the overdrive and then the distortion. Really, really beefy, really fat, really analog. So that's basically the synth, at least the front panel, what's on the surface. So on the side here, we have a really awesome and intuitive mod matrix, as well as settings for each of the different settings we just went over. I'm not going to go through each of these in depth because it gets a little technical and probably boring for most people. But one of my absolute favorites is the oscillator, diverge, and drift area. So what I've always found with digital synths is that they can sometimes sound a little sterile and not as full as analog, and the Summit does an amazing job of combating that. So if we have a basic saw patch that sounds like that, as we add in diverge and drift, listen to how it starts to get more full and smeary and a little bit out of tune, but in that wonderful analog way. We kind of overdid it there, but if we dial it back, it sounds great. There we go, much more full. Okay, cool. So, and then the other way you can really impact the sound just right from this menu here is with the spread tool. So that's a mono sound right now. What we can do is we can actually spread out the voices just like on the Prologue across the whole spectrum. Awesome. Couple other highlights from this menu include the fact that we have 2 animate buttons here. They're kind of like triggerable macros. So you can have one button that triggers a whole bunch of different things. Maybe a second oscillator turns on, maybe the filter opens up. And on top of that, we also, of course, have our mod wheel and aftertouch, which we can route whatever we want to as well. That's overall really the synth. I think if I'm going to do a pros and cons list here, so the pros, this is really a Swiss Army knife of a synthesizer. It can do anything. It can do really sick bass sounds. It can do heavy, distorted leads. It can do beautiful pads. It can do plucks. It can do even pretty convincing FM style synth e-piano too, which is awesome. So it's hugely versatile compared to any other synth I own. Another pro, great keyboard. I love the way it feels. 61 keys. It's really sleek. It's really fast. I'm not a great keyboard player, but I've been practicing a lot on this synth, and it's my favorite one that I've tried so far. On top of that, knob per function. That's awesome. Almost everything. Major bonus points as a pro is the FM on the front panel. I wish more synths would do that, as well as the really creative modulation such as ring mod and OSC3 filter mod right on the surface too. These are pretty interesting things that you usually have to menu dive for, and I think it's awesome. This synth is really geared towards sound design, which is why they put all these interesting things right on the surface. Final pro would have to be the effects section. You can run your guitar, you can run your keyboard, you can even run your vocals through this effects section as an external instrument, and it sounds amazing. I've done that a couple times now where I'll record my guitar going through the Summit into Logic, and it just has an incredible ethereal sound. So those are a couple things I love about the Summit. As for a couple things I don't like, so the aftertouch. The aftertouch is really stiff compared to the Moog Matriarch, my other synth with aftertouch. This is just, it's not that good. It's really hard to engage. It's not the end of the world, but if you love aftertouch and that's why you're buying this keyboard, is a keyboard with aftertouch, I would probably go for something else. Second thing I don't love is I do wish sometimes the screen was a little bigger. And I also wish that there was a way that you could enable touch modulation. What that means is I would select one thing and then I would go like that and wiggle it and it would turn on, kind of like the Prophet line of synths have. That would be nice. It's not a deal breaker, but sometimes when I'm trying to modulate a ton of things by one same LFO, it can take a little longer than if I was just to wiggle a knob a couple times. Final thing I don't like is this synth. If you're not careful, it has a very high noise floor. Let's see if we can hear that. So you can do a lot of things to combat that, such as if you put in some overdrive, it'll raise the volume without having a noise floor increased. You can also just layer up your sound. So instead of doing one voice, you're doing 3 or 4. So there's a lot of things you can do. It's not the end of the world, but compared to some of my other synths like the Prologue or the Moog Matriarch that just have no noise floor, and no matter what you do, you're always going to get that crisp, clean signal. I do notice the Summit there's been problems where I've had to re-record things because there's an audible hissing sound in the background. Other than that, those are the only 2 things that I wouldn't say are perfect about this synth. It's a really great instrument, and yeah, let me know in the comments if you have any questions, if you're considering buying it. If you already have one, let me know what you like about it, what you don't like about it. I'm always happy to talk nerdy synth talk. So with that being said, thanks for watching the review, and we're going to play some sounds now. Hey guys, thanks again for watching. If you're new around here, please make sure to like and subscribe, and welcome to the channel. I've got lots more videos on music production, on synths, as well as a lot of my own music on there. If you like analog synths, be sure to check out my new song Horrors, linked above. Almost the entire drop was made using my analog synths. So yeah, thanks as always for tuning in. Miles away out.